And good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Ivy Baptist Church's Bible study tonight. We are very happy and excited to have a critical conversation. That has been the series theme for the month of August. We're going to start with a word of prayer and we'll share some comments and then we'll jump into our study tonight. So let's pray. So, God, I want to thank you for this opportunity tonight to just come and to share and to talk about issues that are impacting our world, things that we need to know about. So bless our conversation tonight. May we learn, may we gain insight and understanding. And we ask all of this in your name we pray. Amen. So again, thank you all for viewing this tonight. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Pastor Kevin Swan here at Ivy Baptist Church, and we are very excited. I wanted to have some conversations that I don't ordinarily get to have in church. And I think tonight's topic is certainly one that I hope will not be the last conversation that we have. It's certainly one that we need to initiate and learn from. So I've invited some guests to be with us tonight who can lend insight into this critical conversation. And tonight's topic will be on climate change, something that is very, very important and perhaps something that is not discussed as much as it needs to. And so before we get into the introductions, I do want to take a moment to ask that for those of you who are viewing with us, that you do four things. Number one is that you like this video. So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please take a moment to like it, or at some point during the video, if you would like it, we would greatly appreciate it. We also need you to subscribe to our pages. So if you are on Facebook, take a moment, please, just to join our Facebook page. Or if you're on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Right now, we have on our YouTube channel approximately 9,500 subscribers, and we're really trying to get to 10,000 within the next few days. And so it is important that if you are with us and you've been streaming with us and watching our ministry, don't just watch us, but go ahead and subscribe. That helps our channel out tremendously. Third thing is to share. Share this conversation tonight. This is going to be very important. It's going to be very enlightening. Please share this now with some of your other social media friends and let them know that you are watching this Bible study tonight and you want to be engaged, and help them to be engaged in this conversation. And then the last thing is, you're already doing it. I see some of you already doing it. Please comment. So comment, and we will make sure that if you have questions tonight, we want to ask these questions to our guests so that we can have a really good conversation. So this still is going to be interactive. It's not going to be one way, us talking to you. We want you to be engaged. So again, tonight's study is called Climate Change and the Church. And why are we having this conversation? Well, I believe that when we look at Scripture, God has called us to be wise stewards. And a steward is nothing more than a manager over the affairs of something or someone else. When we read the Scripture, as a matter of fact, in the first two chapters of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, God talks about how he created the heavens and the earth and then gave it over to mankind to take care of it. And so what we find in Genesis 1:26-28, it says that God said, let us make mankind in our image and in our likeness so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, the livestock, the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. God then blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it or manage it. And he said, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves along the ground. So we see very clearly on the first page of scripture that mankind has been given an awesome responsibility of taking care of what God has created. And in chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 15, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to work it and to take care of it. So again, God created all of the earth's beauty and splendor for mankind's benefit and enjoyment. But we also have a responsibility to take care of it properly. And part of the conversation tonight that we're going to have on climate change may suggest that mankind has not done maybe as good of a job as we need to in managing what we have been given. So how do we have this conversation? Okay. So tonight I'm happy to introduce our guest for tonight. Our first guest is Miss Taylor Stephenson. She is the midday and weekday morning meteorologist for 13 News Now. So Miss Taylor, thank you so much for being on tonight and welcome to our Bible study.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Absolutely. Next, we have Miss Grace Holmes. Miss Grace is with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. I met her at a conference at Christopher Newport, and we actually are partnering on a project right now that we'll talk about tonight as it pertains to air quality. So, Miss Holmes, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
And last but not least, Miss Christy Everett. Miss Everett, I do want to especially thank you because you got the invitation to this and you gladly accepted, even though it was relatively last minute. She is with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and she is the director. She's the Hampton Roads director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So, Miss Everett, thank you so much also for being on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So let's get started. Let's talk about, how did you and your interest become involved in the issue of climate change? What kind of led you to kind of look at this and kind of want to know more about this subject? So, Ms. Taylor, I'll start with you.
So currently I'm a meteorologist, and obviously weather and climate go hand in hand. While they aren't the same, they go hand in hand. So that's where I really got that passion about climate change, especially because a lot of times climate change affects those communities, the minoritized and underserved communities. So Black and brown communities, low income communities, especially because as temperatures get warmer, those are the impacts that are going to be felt first in those communities. I'm from Atlanta, and so I lived on the east side. That was not one of the richer sides of town. So all of the things that were happening in that metro area were being affected in those communities that looked like mine. So in meteorology, not only did I want to enforce that Black and brown people can be in meteorology too, but also climate change goes hand in hand. If we don't get this climate change thing under control, our day-to-day weather starts to be impacted as well. So that's where I came from.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Grace, kind of tell us your journey of how you became involved and interested in climate change.
Sure. So I was a biology major by education. And so I learned a lot about it when I went through my undergraduate degree. And I was a high school teacher on the subjects of environmental science and biology as well. And so I had the opportunity to have discussions with young people about these kinds of topics. It really is obvious when you're in a classroom with young people these days how much action they're interested in taking and how much these things really do matter to them on a really practicable level. And so I find myself in this position as an environmental justice coordinator with the Department of Environmental Quality, kind of taking that as a action item standpoint from the perspective of coastal resilience, as well as kind of minimizing impacts that people are feeling day to day. And I wanted to co-sign what Taylor said, that we do focus in my job on environmental justice communities in Virginia, which are defined through the 2020 Environmental Justice Act on the basis of communities of color that make up a community as well as low income status. And oftentimes those environmental justice communities do suffer impacts from these kinds of coastal resilience issues first and foremost. And so that's kind of how I come to the subject.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that tonight. It's really important that our viewers really understand how climate change does impact people disproportionately. And sometimes we may not understand how that works, but we'll try to explain that tonight. Ms. Everett, could you also please take some time and explain your journey, how you became involved around the topic of climate change?
Sure. I've worked with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for 23 years, just about that, this fall, and we focus on waterways that drain into the Chesapeake Bay. We are lucky, very fortunate in Hampton Roads to have so many waterways. Sometimes you have to go over a bridge or a tunnel and you get stuck in traffic and you curse those waterways, but hopefully most people can enjoy them at some point, whether they're, indirectly or directly making a living off the waterways. If you're involved with the tourism industry or the service industry, you're obviously making some money that's helping. Our waterways are helping support. Tourism is a big part of Virginia's economy, and many people come here from all across the nation, as well as globally, to enjoy our beaches. We really depend on the economic vitality of our waterways, and water quality and habitat are really important. It's a big focus of our work, and many people are working in that field to improve and protect our really valuable waterways. But climate change is making that job harder, and it's also posing some challenges, additional challenges for our waterway. But I think now that we realize we have to respond to climate change, not only preventing further climate change, but what it's been doing to our region, what it will do to our region, we have this challenge in front of us that may help us if we can think creatively and roll up our sleeves. I know no one's wearing sleeves these days because it's 105 degrees, but if we can metaphorically roll up our sleeves and think of some ways, I think we can improve our communities. I think we can improve our waterways, and I think we can address some of these climate issues. So it is actually a really important time to be talking about this. There are some great opportunities, but they're in response to a lot of challenges that we just really can't ignore anymore.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have this conversation. Miss Everett, we're noticing that there's a lag in your video, and so we may need you to log out and log back in, much like I had to do pre-show. So we can see if we can get that cleared up. We can hear you fine, but there is a delay between your words and what we see. So would you mind logging out and then coming back in, and we'll see if that corrects the problem?
Not at all.
All right, thank you. All right. So while she's doing that, I still want to keep the conversation going. So Taylor, maybe you can help us because you do, you're a meteorologist. So we're looking across the world and we're seeing increase in strength of hurricanes. We're seeing Maui, for example, the wildfires that are happening out there. Some of the deadliest wildfires in the history of our country are happening right now. When we look at all of these natural issues that we haven't seen much before, even like the excessive heat in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, can we contribute that or attribute that to climate change?
In the day-to-day, we call that weather. So if we're just looking at a small scale, we wouldn't call that climate change. In the big scheme of things, absolutely. The whole summer has been super hot, especially for places along the South. Places like Austin, Texas had 40 days in a row of 100-degree plus weather this summer alone. We've seen sea surface temperatures 2 to 3 degrees above where they should be for this time of year. Down in the Florida Keys, it was reached 100 degrees in one of those buoys off of the Keys. That's never been done before. So of course we can attribute that to climate change. Speaking on the Hawaii stuff, which is the most recent stuff that's been happening, the wildfires in Hawaii, they were fueled by a hurricane that passed just south of Hawaii that spun the winds the way they did, which caused a lot of those flames to go a long distance and just devastate the area of Lahaina. So of course, yes, we can attribute this to climate change, but this has been something that's been going on, not just a day-to-day thing, but for centuries. This happened when we first had the Industrial Revolution, where we started switching from man-made or human labor to using fossil fuels. So we have to go back a long period of time to really see these things. That's why I want to make it very clear that weather is very day to day, and it only happens on a scale of minutes to hours. Climate change is over a month, 2 months, a year, decades, centuries. But yes, absolutely. The stuff that we are seeing this year has been attributed to years and years of climate change.
Yeah, and that's important to know because if you've been studying some of the temperatures of months recently within the last, 5 to 10 years, we have seen the hottest temperatures of our Earth on record, and so that has an impact on our Earth. And so I know Miss Everett, you can attest to this. If it's hotter, then that means that you have warmer water. If you have warmer water, then that also means the hurricanes, and we live on the coast. The hurricanes are going to be much stronger because the stronger the water, the more energy a hurricane can get. And so, I don't think people really understand how all of this kind of correlates and works together. But let's start then with a working definition, perhaps. Grace, when you think of climate change, how would you define it to somebody that may not understand what this is?
So, in the context of the Department of Environmental Quality, it is impacts that we see sort of changing over time. So, in terms of coastal resilience, it's recurrent flooding that we see happening over and over and over again in the same areas, and we see it getting worse over time. And there are a lot of folks who I'm sure even in Newport News can speak to that. And so it's kind of this threat to our coastal resources and that resilience that is really threatened. And so DEQ has a program called the Coastal Zone Management Program for coastal communities. And that program really helps to kind of prepare for the predicted effects of climate change. And we really focus on that sea level rise and coastal flooding aspect. And kind of try to, use mapping and different kinds of funds to look at the potential impacts of that sea level rise and severe storm events, and hopefully develop tools and plans to address those impacts, because we will continue to see them.
Yeah, and we're going to get into sea level rise later. But Miss Everett, how would you have a working definition if somebody didn't know anything about climate change? What would you describe it to be?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the cause, and sometimes you do hear debate about the cause, to me, I will say, I think in a way, if people have a certain opinion, it's really hard to kind of get them off that opinion. But we are seeing the effects of climate change. And for example, in Hampton Roads, we have subsidence, and then we have the effects of climate change. Essentially, when warmer water expands, it takes up more space because of the melting of the ice of the glaciers. We have isostatic rebound, which means if our coastal area was your elbow and your hand was the Midwest, where those big glaciers were in the Midwest, that area is rebounding, and so our area is sinking. Our area is also subsiding or sinking because it was built on old fill hundreds of years ago, old oyster shells, and it was old marshland, and the infrastructure is sinking. So actually you have water coming in through the stormwater pipes where it should be going out the stormwater pipes, especially as that water is rising because of higher temperatures. You have more storm events, not only hurricanes because of the warmer water you mentioned, but you have with warmer weather patterns, and Taylor could speak to this, I'm sure, you have increased and more intense storm events. And then you have these really built out areas. Our cities have been building out for hundreds of years. And so we have this impervious surface, lots of parking lots, lots of building. So you don't have a place for that water to go, trees or plants that used to be here. So it pools up and it meets the stormwater system, and you have these microbursts of storms. And so even maybe not during a hurricane, and we sometimes even call it blue sky flooding, you're having more and more water coming from these different areas. And we're also, as I mentioned, subsiding or sinking. That also happens because of groundwater withdrawal. So we have lots of issues, and you have water coming from the groundwater table. So we're not in a great area in terms of challenges, but climate change is contributing to that sea level rise, no doubt about it. We have 1.5 foot of the effect of sea level rise over the last century. We're looking to 3 to 5 feet more over the next century. And why that matters too is some of those wetland areas that are really important for recreational fishing or commercial fishing. If you've ever seen the bumper sticker, no wetlands, no seafood, that kind of reminds you, wetlands are critical for cleaning our water, for habitat for critters such as a blue crab or a striped bass or a puppy drum or whatever you like to catch. Those areas are going to drown because they're just a little thin sliver along our shoreline. So we also are feeling extreme temperatures. We talked about that. We have a lot of urban heat islands in our cities, in Norfolk and Newport News and Hampton. And that goes back to, we talked at the beginning about Black and brown communities, some redlining practices. You can look at urban tree canopy and overlay redlining and overlay heat-related alerts and calls. And it's a real health issue. And again, we've got to see this as an opportunity. We can use this to invest in our community and prevent further climate change, but we need to cool our cities. We need to reinvent because the effects are not anything that's healthy for our communities. It's not attractive. Everyone just wants to go inside. It's like it's February. Everyone's hiding inside because it's so hot. And we really do need to kind of reclaim our environment because there's so many challenges, but it's an opportunity to really think about our environment, and it's becoming inhospitable, but we need to reinvest in our communities.
So I want to reiterate for the viewers what Ms. Everett just said. So redlining, or normally communities of color, are the ones that are most impacted by climate change. And there's various reasons for that we'll get into. Our church, where our church is located, is in the Southeast Newport News community. It was redlined. And so what we see here, and this is how I got involved with Grace, is right down the street is the Newport News shipyard. They have a coal all over the place, and that coal and that wind blows. And so the effects from that can impact the residents in the Southeast community. Higher rates of children and adults having asthma-related illnesses or respiratory illnesses, and other challenges because of redlining, climate change, and just how things have been built in our cities. So if anybody's wondering why we're having this conversation, it's because there are things that our community experiences that sometimes we don't think about or we don't address, but it is impacting us disproportionately. And we need to be aware of how to address these things. And I know we're talking about sea level rise, and I really want to get into that. But before we do, I do want to ask, and I'll just throw this out to anyone who wants to answer. We know that the earth is warming. And I know that sometimes, climate change has become a political issue, and we're not trying to put politics in this at all. But the research tells us that our earth is warming and that there is a global warming. So can somebody tell me what is actually causing the earth to warm? Is it some things that mankind is doing? Are we mismet? What actually is causing the earth to warm up?
So I think there are a few phenomenon that lend themselves to that, but I think the most direct answer to that are greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases are gases that can trap heat in the atmosphere, almost like a convection oven. Almost, it just doesn't allow heat out as easily when you get a concentration of these types of gases in the atmosphere. And that is called the greenhouse effect, is what we call that. It prevents heat from escaping from the lower atmosphere when solar radiation comes in. And these kinds of gases are emitted through lots of human activities. And so certainly there is some things to suggest that those contribute to greenhouse gases in our atmosphere.
And Taylor, you mentioned earlier that when we moved to the Industrial Revolution, like, you know, now we have cars and we have all these the industrial plants, all of that stuff. Is that also, you know, part of what Grace is talking about? You know, releasing all of these emissions into our atmosphere, the greenhouse effect.
Absolutely. I mean, Grace is spot on. That's exactly what I was going to say, greenhouse gases, because one thing people don't realize is with those gases like methane, they take years to break down. So this is not just when you're emitting to the air and it goes away in a couple weeks. This is going to stay for 10 to 50 years, that one particle of gas. Now, if everybody is emitting the same gas, it's all in that air. So yes, it comes from cars. It comes from the big plants we had that are using fossil fuels. That's why a lot of places are trying, or a lot of people are trying to get others to use solar energy, something that's already coming through, to use as a replacement for that. And of course, now that we are using up the oil, we have to find other ways to use that, find other ways to fuel our plants as well. But yes, it stems from that point where we were, as humans, saying we're going to go to machinery instead of doing everything by hand. But of course, the Industrial Revolution happened 200, 300 years ago. So we're talking about things that happened way far away that are also now stemming into that part of climate change.
And if you add to that 200-300 years, and then on top of that, we have more people living on the earth now than perhaps ever before. Lifespan expectancy is much longer now because of better health and technology and all of that. But if you got more cars on the road, for example, that could also be releasing more of these gases into the atmosphere. I think, Ms. Everett, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we all are consumers of energy. We're not necessarily, I don't know if there's a little feedback there, using it most wisely, or, you know, approaching our energy use in a conservative way, conservation-minded way. And we can use renewables more so than we are choosing to, or by asking, for example, our utilities to use renewables. But per capita, United States residents use more energy than most other countries, industrialized or developing. So it's really important to know that we're still wasting energy. We're still choosing to do that. We're still kind of taking the easy way out. So we probably need to take some responsibility for that energy use and just do it smarter and more long term. Sorry about the feedback.
Hey, we got you. You said the key part that you said is that the United States is one of the leading consumers of energy in the world. And we're not doing enough on our part. And this is not political spin. This is fact that we could be doing better to mitigate some of the releasing of the gases and the methane and the carbon dioxide and other things that are happening in how we use energy here in our country. Which then leads me to talking about now, you know, about sea level rise. So what's also happening, and Grace, you can help me with this, right? What's also happening with the global warming is that now a lot of the icebergs are starting to melt. And as the icebergs are melting, you know, they have to go somewhere. So they're going into our ocean and waterways, which is causing the waters to rise. Now, I don't know if y'all heard what Miss Everett said earlier, but we live in a low-lying area, right? So as these levels continue to rise at a certain point, maybe not in our lifetime, but we may have children or grandchildren that might experience this, where the sea level rise is going to impact Norfolk, for example, a very low-lying area that could perhaps some parts of it could be moved underwater at some point. So, Grace, am I right in describing that, how the icebergs are melting and it's causing the sea level rise?
Yeah, that's certainly a big part of it. Is literally just more water that is there. Also, like Christy said earlier, When water is hotter, it expands, and so it takes up more space, as well as there are a lot of factors that kind of feed into this, but especially in the Hampton Roads area, we are sinking, as well as having sea level rise. So that kind of compounds that effect. And that's due to a lot of different factors. It's due to the fact that we were built on wetlands in the first place, and a lot of our built environments here. It also has to do with the fact that we, withdraw groundwater. It has to do. Some folks think it has to do with the meteor that formed the Chesapeake Bay millions of years ago. There's theories that on the eastern shore, especially, that really lends itself to further sinking as well. And so there's a lot of unique factors in the Hampton Roads area, as well as the traditional kind of like thought that as the icebergs melt, there's more water.
Sheesh.
And I would like to add to that too, what Christy was saying earlier about more intense storms. We always do talk about, the sea levels rising, but what about the storms we have that cause flooding anyways? I mean, think about the storms we had yesterday. They washed us out in some places in terms of just heavy, heavy rainfall. Well, it all goes back to the water cycle. You have the sun coming down, the hotter it is, the easier it is to evaporate that water. Goes up to a cloud, becomes a cloud, rains down. The higher you have, water has a very high heat capacity, which means it takes a lot of heat to warm it up. The higher the heat is, the easier it is to warm that water up. That's when we get those really intense storms that bring a lot of flooding down. So it's, as Grace and Christy said, it is sea level rise, but it's also the storms we get in an afternoon, a summertime in Hampton Roads that could also cause flooding in our area.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, I think the effects are, they're here. I mean,
So
I
what
know
we're hearing is that
several
this is
people-
very complicated. This is more.
Sorry, you may have stopped for me. I was going to add, can you all hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, I
Yes,
know
we can
a
hear
lot of people who have lost vehicles. I mean, even over like the past 6 months, it's almost a somewhat regular occurrence. So there's economic harm and damage that's occurring now. And they're not usually happening, of course, because of hurricanes. We haven't been, knock on wood, directly hit from a hurricane for years, but it's happening in nor'easters or these microbursts. So we really are feeling the effects now. There's areas that have nuisance flooding that have affected property values, whether residential, commercial. Particularly, I know of many in Norfolk. So the storm water that's coming and exacerbated by climate change is just getting more expensive and more of a problem, I think, a pain for a lot of different community members. Sorry to interrupt.
Now,
I'll let you have it back.
Yeah, I've done some research now. Maybe one of you all can correct me, but I'm also hearing that one of the effects of the global warming and our waters warming are the coral reefs. That now the reefs are very valuable to the ecosystems in the waterways. And when the reefs become at a certain temperature, they end up bleaching, for example. And when they bleach, you can't get that back. Once they bleach, that's it. They don't go back to normal. And from what I'm understanding, a lot of the coral reefs, because of the rising temperature of our waterways, have become bleached. Can anybody speak to that?
Well, I will say, going back to the buoy situation down at the Florida Keys, that was their main concern. The water temperature is so hot that it's going to bleach the reefs right at the Florida Peninsula. And of course, like you said, the ecosystems is not only about humans, it's about the life on Earth as well, the other animals that have to deal with it. Because we're almost in that phase where we have to learn how to adapt to climate change rather than mitigating climate change. Now, I do want to give the definitions of mitigation and adaptation. Adaptation is, hey, we're in the midst of climate change. We really feel like there's no strong way to combat this climate change. We're going to find avenues around this and learn how to live with it. Mitigation is, we are going to find ways, while we may not be able to stop climate change, we can slow it down for future generations. Because at this point, For us, we have to think more about our kids, and their kids, because what we're seeing is that every year we're getting hotter and hotter. But of course, like you said, it's affecting the ecosystems as well.
Yeah. And so again, why are we having this conversation? Because scriptures tell us that a wise person leaves an inheritance to their children's children. And what are we actually going to be leaving behind? I think about that often to my children. Maybe if I have grandchildren, what kind of earth are we going to give them if we don't take some opportunities now to address these issues? Now, I want to ask each of you a simple question here on a scale, because we know that there's a wide range of thought when it comes to climate change. On the one hand, there are some people who say climate change is not an issue at all. There's no such thing. It's not a problem at all. At the opposite end of the spectrum, there are some people who are saying we're already doomed. There's nothing that we can do. The earth is what it is. Where do you see yourself in this discussion of where you think we are relative to climate change? I know that you don't think that it doesn't exist, but on the opposite end, I don't know if you feel like it's doomsday or what. So where do you feel like we are? Taylor, I'll start with you.
I'm actually going to pass the mic to Grace because I think she had something to say before this one.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Are you okay? Are you sure? Okay. For me, I feel like I want to be as optimistic as possible. While yes, it is definitely a really bad situation we're getting ourselves into and we're currently in. I believe in climate change is absolutely real. Climate change is science. It's not political, it's science. But I think there are ways that we can mitigate climate change. I mean, and I know we may go over this later, and I'll probably talk more about like the studies that have been done to see what we can actually do. But I feel like it's not completely doomsday. We are that generation that can actually try to mitigate or at least make things work better for our kids and everything. So it's not completely doomsday, but I do feel like we have to take action now. We can't wait another decade.
Okay. Grace, how about you? Where are you on that continuum?
I'm also positive about it. I think that, we have the tools and the resources to address these impacts. And I think that we need to continue to develop those. But I do think, we have a Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan that is a document that kind of charts the course to adapt and protect Virginia's coast. We do have a lot of funding that helps to address priority issues at state, regional, local levels that kind of try to take a look at this from a community resilience, but also a natural resilience perspective. So, for example, looking at things like living shorelines and learning how to work with the environment that we're in and sort of meet it where it's at. And I know, kind of as a segue, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation does a lot of great work in that vein as well.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Everett, where are you on the continuum from climate change doesn't exist to the opposite end, we're already doomed?
Yeah, so we have a lot of challenges. I will say, kind of as I think I've mentioned, we just need to start getting after the challenge, the opportunities to change. I mean, we need to plant more trees today. Not really today. They'll die if you plant them today. But in the fall, when it gets a little cooler, we need to put in wetland gardens or rain gardens to hold some of that flood water. It's also going to beautify your community and your neighborhood, maybe your churchyard. It's going to hold the flood water, but maybe it will also be filtering out those pollutants or creating habitat for pollinators or wildfowl that come there or wildlife. We need to be putting in more walkways that hold stormwater, but also provide recreational amenities. They call those wetland benches or might be a bioswale. There are so many techniques. And as Grace mentioned, natural resilience, some of those are nature-based. So they revegetate our land. We've put lots of houses, lots of buildings, lots of roadways in our communities, but we really probably have to put some of those features that mimic nature and that mimic the processes so the water can drain and filter back down to our aquifer. We've just been trying to send that water off directly into our waterways, and you can't really do it anymore. It doesn't have the capacity, particularly with sea level rise, and that water is polluting our local waterways. So re-envisioning how we manage water is really important, and that's to be saying and working with our homeowners and working with our communities to think, gosh, where can we put something that's going to increase habitat, protect water quality, hold floodwaters, and really, again, just more trees, more tree planting. Chesapeake Bay Foundation's worked with some churches in the Richmond area to take an area out of their parking lot to put more trees in to hold some of that water running off the parking lot. They took another portion of the roof and then let rainwater that's coming off the roof feed a garden, and then use the garden to help feed the community. So there are a lot of really multi-beneficial solutions, but we need to revegetate and re-landscape kind of our communities so they're cooler and they're greener and they're cleaner. And not only can we adapt better to all this extra water we're going to have, or maybe drought, right? Because a part of climate change is drought at the same time as too much water, and then help mitigate as well. But using renewables, I mean, we just have a lot of work to do, but every little bit counts, and every little bit turns kind of the aircraft carrier. It's a good analogy for around here, around, which is not going to be easy, but we've got to try because we need to reinvest in our communities.
So I want to speak to trees for a minute, because I think for those of you who are viewing, you need to understand why trees are important. And can somebody quickly explain that part of it? Like, I know you say we need to plant more trees, but why do we need more trees? Because it seems like whenever I'm driving down the street, there's always a new housing development being built. They're tearing trees down. There's a new business parkway in our city. They're tearing trees down. So for some people, it may not connect. Like, as cities are growing and populations are growing and people want to expand out, in order to expand out, you go into other neighborhoods or other areas and you're killing trees to do it. So can somebody explain why planting trees is so important in addressing, or at least being one part of the solution to climate change?
Taylor or Grace, do you want to go, or?
Christy, you were like, that's your topic. Right?
I could sell trees, even though I don't sell trees. Yeah. So, I mean, trees are great because, first and foremost, they shade, right? So if trees around houses reduce your cooling costs in the summer, they reduce your energy usage. They purify the air. They take in pollutants, including greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and then they produce oxygen. They create habitat for wildlife, birds, other critters. They help protect against flooding. So they're using evapotranspiration to take some of that moisture out. They hold, kind of taking that stormwater, that excess stormwater, and putting it back down into the ground. They reduce pollution and beautify our communities. There's lots of studies to show how property values increase with tree canopy, particularly the larger, older trees. So they have a lot of value for our community, our environment, short and long term. But you're right. Unfortunately, humans don't always act the best way. We make short-term choices. Maybe that someone buys a lot and says, if you take the trees out, I can get more square feet. I can make more money. And so you make short-term decisions. So we, again, have a lot of challenges. I will say, though, that where we can put a tree, we should put a tree. Doesn't cost much money. You have to kind of give it some love the first year. You can put something called a tree gator around it, which is like a little knapsack with water. And you want to plant it the right time of year. There's plenty of nonprofits that will help. Some nonprofits will even give you trees for free. So Pastor Swan, you're welcome to pass my information around and we can get people connected with the resources. Cities also help too. Sometimes they provide free trees. I'm not sure about Newport News. So there's lots of resources, but we just need to really start doing it because like you said, trees are coming down every day. And I think people are afraid of trees sometimes. So they take it down. They think, oh, what if the tree falls? But we've lost a lot by this mentality. And so we probably need to rethink the value.
Yeah, that's correct. And so let me just try to explain this, because I know this is fascinating conversation, but many people who are watching may be like me, who was maybe half asleep in science class and didn't quite understand all of this, right? So, in a nutshell, trees are beneficial because, again, the warming of our Earth is caused by certain um, methane and carbon dioxide and other gases. Trees absorb some of those gases. So when we cut down the trees, we cut down the ability for those gases to be absorbed, which means that they're released back into the atmosphere, which continues the warming cycle. Now, let me make this practical for our congregation. Our congregation, again, is in the southeast community of Newport News. In the southeast community of Newport News, which was redlined, normally you have a large concentrated area of people in a small area. But this is true for any hood across the United States. In every hood across the United States, you do not see trees. And when you do a study, and I know, Grace, you were with me at the Social Justice Conference, Dr. Johnny Finn, shout out to him, at Christopher Newport. He did a research study of our area, and the hottest places in our area are in those urban concentrated communities, because you have concrete, you have asphalt, and you don't have trees. So this, again, y'all, is something that we need to know about, because, again, it's impacting our children and our children's children and even us, because we don't understand all of this, right? But we need to. And so trees are very, very important. We need to find ways to grow green spaces and trees. So, Grace, Taylor, are there any other things that we can do besides planting trees that you think would be helpful to us addressing this issue of climate change?
I have a lot of great resources that I would love to provide, but I'll briefly just kind of talk through a few. But I would love to share them with you, Pastor Swan, or people can reach out if they'd like to access them later. Looking into creating a living shoreline, if you have any kind of coastal property, can be really helpful. Basically, what that means is a lot of landowners chose to harden their shorelines with like large rocks or like wood or a vinyl wall that we would usually call like a bulkhead. And a lot of times those practices are really detrimental on habitats and water quality due to loss of trees and shrubs, like we're talking about, loss of wetlands, loss of beaches and banks, and underwater grass beds that can be affected. And then also hardened shoreline really increases erosion on nearby properties. So if you have any kind of waterfront property, looking at your shoreline and kind of looking at to see if you can make that more resilient is a great way to start. Also, I will just shout out that restoring oyster reefs and seagrass beds to our coastal waters is a really great program. The Virginia Institute of Marine Science does a lot of great work around this. Chesapeake Bay Foundation does a lot of great work around this. I know Christy would be certainly happy to connect people to that program. We also can look at putting conservation easements on properties. We would love to talk with folks about if they're interested in planting for wildlife habitat or riparian buffers or a rain garden, what kinds of trees or shrubs or flowers would be good for that. We can help make sure those things are native, so you're not planting invasive species and those kinds of things. And we can also help you control invasive species if that's a problem for you. We can also, there's things like wildlife watching. So just like reporting when you see a dolphin in the Elizabeth River can really help kind of inform how these things are affecting our waters. Identifying like if there's something that you notice that's happening, like a fish kill or some kind of toxic spill, letting people know. helping people learn more about this. Septic tanks, if you have trouble with that, we would love to help you talk through that and connect you to resources, because a lot of times like overflowing septic tanks can really impact water quality in areas. Lots and lots of great resources in that vein. And there's more. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, this is all good stuff. Taylor, can you think of anything that people should be aware of? Like, for example, I'm hearing like aerosol sprays. Does that impact the ozone layer of the atmosphere? Or just simple things that maybe people aren't aware that they're doing that are impacting our climate?
Yes. So one thing, yes, aerosol spray is not the best to use. I would probably stay away from them. One of the things that we can do like on a daily basis, why not carpool with people to work or carpool with people to church? You're taking down that one less car. Now, one car may not change our whole system, but at least it gets us on the path to doing these small things. It only takes about 3 weeks to create a habit. Instead of going to church by yourself, grab your friend. Let's go into a carpool and use one less car. There's little small things you can do, public transportation, walking. And not only are you helping the earth, you're helping your body at the same time. It's a win-win situation. Walking to work. I could walk to work at this moment. I could. But we're also wired to use the machinery around us as effectively harming our earth instead of just using our own two legs. So I think that there's small things like that we can do, just daily small things um, that we could do. Reusing and conserving water. There's really small things like not leaving the water running when you are brushing your teeth. There's just small things that can make a pretty big impact if we all get on the same page.
Yeah, and that's why we're having this conversation, because I want our congregants to be more informed about the small things that we can all do together. Um, Christy, can you paint a picture for me of what you think, even looking at the Chesapeake Bay for an example, if you were to forecast 10, 15, 20 years out, if we're not making the type of changes that we need to make, where do you imagine this region being, or the Chesapeake Bay being, if we're not doing what we need to do now?
Yeah, we're going to have some trouble. Our region, the sea level rise forecast, as I mentioned, we're looking at 3 to 5 feet over the next century. That's 50 to 80% of wetland loss. Already, our surface temperature has increased since the 80s, has increased 1.3 degrees. And the reason that's a problem is what we're dealing with in Chesapeake Bay is we have a lot of nutrients, because out of the whole Chesapeake Bay watershed, there's 19 million people. And they're all going to the bathroom. That's going to a wastewater treatment plant, but that's excess nutrients coming into our waterways, and we're downstream of that. It's lots of farms, thousands of farms. It's lots of cities upstream. As I mentioned, 19 million people almost. And so our waterways have recovered in some ways because people have been really working hard. We've been upgrading wastewater treatment plants. Farmers have been putting conservation practices on. Government's been doing a lot. We've been working on utilities that maybe leaked sewage in the water. So there's been a lot of progress, and we're almost getting to fishable, swimmable waters in many areas. We've made a lot of progress with oyster restoration. We should feel very proud. In Hampton Roads, we were we made a lot of money off of, this is the kind of the birthplace of oysters nationwide. Once the train system came in, we were shipping oysters in those old historic cans across the nation. And I'm sure some of those cans said Newport News, Virginia, in Hampton, Virginia. And all those oysters were almost gone, and they've started to come back. So we're seeing a lot of successes with our waterways to get fishable, swimmable waterways, oysters coming back. We should feel really proud. But as that water increases in temperature, it holds less oxygen. And critters, just like humans, the marine critters need oxygen. And what happens is when you have all that pollution, all those nutrients, nitrogen off, phosphorus, and sediment coming off, you have algae grow. And that's why when you look at the water, I think you all are close to Chesapeake Avenue. So when you're looking at Hampton Roads or the James, it looks, we say to the students, it looks like pea soup. but it looks murky. It doesn't look clean and clear. It should look clean and clear, but we have too much algae. And when you have too much algae in the summer, when it's hot, what we've been talking about, and when you have lots of nutrients running off really fast from these rain events, you have algal blooms. So lots of algae in the water. When that algae dies and decomposes, oxygen is taken up. And then if you're a blue crab, or you're a striped bass, or you're an oyster, which oysters can't move, right? They're stuck on their reefs. They're not going to get the oxygen. So it's making it harder for those critters. So we've got some issues, not only for our marine life, but it's just going to we're going to have to work harder. But as I said, I feel really excited because right now there's solutions that improve our communities, cool our communities, make our communities greener and more livable, reinvest in areas that have been disinvested in, right? We talked about redlining, and see water as an amenity. We always talk about living with water. So the Dutch have done this for years, and we're just kind of learning how. We've been saying, like, water go away, put up a wall or put up in a storm drain, get the water away. That's not going to work anymore. So what we need to be doing is saying, where can we bring water back in our community, like a rain garden or a constructed wetland, and have that water come in, have it be beautiful and an amenity and a recreational value, and allow people to come out and enjoy it and appreciate it, but at the same time acting as habitat and filtering out that pollution and holding that flood water. So there's lots of engineered solutions, but we need to start saying, let's do them. Like, let's start now, because these things take years. So I would say, Taylor, you provided some great suggestions, Grace, you too, but I think, if anything, let your decision makers, let your community members know, your Newport News City Council members, the mayor, say, we got to do things better. How are we adapting to climate change? How are we preventing climate change? Let's get some good ideas on the table. There's lots of good natural resilience options. We call them nature-based design. Hampton's actually they're doing a groundbreaking for some projects on Friday of this week, that they've done some innovative techniques. They've got communities all over the nation doing it, but we probably just need to do a little bit more. I think there's some flood planning right now in Newport News, but just doing more, speaking up, and so people don't feel like they're in this alone and it's overwhelming.
Yeah. And Grace, and by the way, we're coming up on the end of time, and this has been a fascinating discussion. Time flies when you're having fun, and I'm learning so much. But I want to involve the viewer in this conversation. So please, right now, go ahead and drop your question in the chat. We're going to take the last few moments of this conversation to ask your questions to the panel. So Grace, before we do the question and answer period, can you talk about the partnership between Ivy and your organization, and what the work is and what you hope to get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Pastor Swan said, we met at the Hampton Road Social Justice Conference at Christopher Newport University. And the Department of Environmental Quality is currently working on a grant-funded project in 2 environmental justice communities in Hampton Roads. So the first is the southeast community of Newport News, and the second is Lambert's Point in Norfolk. And those 2 communities were chosen as focal points for this study because of historic air quality concerns, both due to proximity to the coal terminals, Norfolk Southern and Norfolk, and Kinder Morgan and Dominion in Newport News, as well as shipbuilding in Newport News, as well as traffic that heavily goes through both of these areas, Hampton Boulevard and 664. And so for all of those reasons, there have been historic air quality concerns in both of these neighborhoods. And there has never been a neighborhood level look at what people are breathing walking down the street day to day in these neighborhoods. And this is a grant funded study from the EPA that is looking at that air quality. And so we're going to be doing this in 2 parts. The first part is going to be, and is now, purple air sensors, which give you live information about the air quality in your neighborhood. And then the second piece are regulatory grade air monitors that are going to look at pollutants in these areas particulate matter pollutants that can affect human health, as well as particulate matter pollutants that can have toxic metals within them, which are characteristic of coal dust. And so we are taking a look. It's going to be an 18-month study, and we have a sensor currently installed at Ivy Baptist Church. Actually looked at it right before we started, and I think I might need to come troubleshoot this week. I had a couple go down in Newport News, but they're great tools, and it's kind of a way to start looking at citizen science. And, you know, this is absolutely another way that planting trees in your neighborhood can really, really impact things positively. And I will just mention that these monitors are taking a little while to site, and we should have an update. We're going to have our next community meeting in October, and I'll be sure to share that with Pastor Swan when we plan it. But everybody is welcome to participate. If you're interested, if you'd like to know more, please reach out. I'd love to sit down and chat with you about it anytime.
Yeah, we're proud to be a partner of this project because, again, it is measuring the air quality around this southeast community, which, again, Newport News Shipyard is right there with all the coal terminal. And I think we already know pretty much how air quality has been impacted in this community, but now this gives a real hard data-driven look at what can be done to address the issue. So we're proud. Ivy's proud to be a partner in this project. So I'm going to open it up now because I know we're coming to the end, and I know there have been some comments and questions about it. One of the questions is, Christy, you had mentioned, I believe, or Grace, about trees and planting more trees, and there may be organizations that support giving trees to people or helping that out. Can you tell us what organizations may do that, or help us to know how or where to go for more information on that?
The two resources off the top of my head, and I'm sure I can pull up some more, are Keep Norfolk Beautiful and the Department of Forestry in Virginia. They do tree grants. And so you can apply for them like kind of on an individual basis, but we've also had success. Actually, someone at DEQ applied for one of those grants in Richmond on her personal time, and ended up being able to plant several trees across the city. And so it can kind of be a project at whatever size you're interested in. So that's a great resource. And then I don't know, Christy, if you have other.
Yeah. So in Norfolk, I know they usually do a tree giveaway once or twice a year. Sometimes they're fruit trees or nut trees. In Newport News City, I was just doing a little online research after I offered that, and there have been some tree giveaways over the last few years. I think I'm happy to look into it and ask contacts that we know in Newport News. But I do think one thing to just check is if people call, if there's a mainline call for the city, like a call in a 311 or 411 number, call and just say, do you all do tree giveaways? And they'll usually get kind of the Newport News Clean Cities Commission equivalent. So I am happy to look at that. Elizabeth River Project is in kind of the Norfolk, Portsmouth, Chesapeake area. So for residents there, as Grace mentioned, that might be an option, but we'll have to do a little bit of homework. I think there's more resources than you'd think. I think we just have to track them down. So I think if folks out there in the congregation are interested, please take a look. I'll look as well. And maybe among us, we can get some information and share resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor, I guess this conversation has gone well because we've gotten the chat. People are interested now, more interested in this topic. Maybe they didn't realize the impact of it before, and that's why we're doing this conversation. So where do you think people can go, or where would you recommend people go to get more information, maybe even on your side as a meteorologist, to understand climate? Are there any websites or references that you would recommend?
The EPA, it has one of like the best websites, especially for climate justice organizations. So the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is, you can literally just go to the EPA.org. That might be the URL. Yeah, EPA.org. And they will give you a list of things you can do, organizations you can partner with. You can also go to the Center for Climate. Let me make sure I'm doing that right. The Climate Change climate.gov should give you that as well. Yeah, climate.gov is going to be the national organization, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which for those who don't know is, sorry, I was trying to find the tab. For those who don't know, is actually down the street from Newport News. It's down here in Norfolk, and it's right next door to my station. So there is a NOAA organization building right next door. They do all the oceanic stuff as well. But if you go to climate.org, that's also a resource you can use to look at not only climate trends, because they will give you 1 month trends and predictions as well. So Climate Prediction Center will do that as well, give you 1 month trends, 3 month trends, yearly trends of what they think will happen, and compare it to what's happened in the past. But EPA and climate.gov will give you some good resources.
Excellent.
I'll just add too, we talked.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Chrissy.
I was just going to say real quickly too, we talked about oysters as well. If somebody wants to help grow out oysters, to kind of adopt an oyster, we have a program where we have other church groups doing it. We have Girl Scout, Boy Scouts, we have individuals. So if you all have a marina or a public location or a friend's dock that you can go to, we give you oysters and then you help grow them out. And then the next year we come and we plant them on an oyster reef close by. So let me know if you want more information, or you can go to our website. But there's plenty of ways to kind of get involved and help as a church community or as an individual as well in the water. So sorry about that. I'll let you go, Grace. I just want to mention that.
Yeah, no worries. Taylor reminded me, and I should have said this. I wanted to mention that we also have a state mapping tool. It's called Coastal GEMS, GEMS, and it's done by our Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. But if you're interested in kind of like taking a look at your specific area, you can look at layers on there, GIS layers that will show you sea level rise predictions, that will show you coastal access and shellfish management and conservation planning areas, coastal populations. So if you're curious about where you live specifically, that's a cool tool to kind of like zoom in and take a look at some of these factors.
Yeah, great information here. I do have a question real quick for Christy. I have seen videos, unfortunately, of lots of pollutants in the waters. And I've seen videos of fish swimming through plastics and things that just don't break down over time. And so I'm sure part of what you do is cleaning up the bay, but is recycling, do you consider recycling and the need to recycle a necessary part of climate change, or is that a separate issue when it comes to our waters?
Yeah, so when we're making petroleum products, which is plastic, so like the laundry jug that you use for your laundry detergent, that's all fossil fuel combustion. And so that's adding to those greenhouse gases. So we do need to reuse petroleum use, whether it's in your vehicle or plastics in general. Unfortunately, there's no place for all those recyclables to go these days worldwide. Essentially, for years and years, they were sending it to China, and it really wasn't being addressed. It's just kind of overwhelmed the system. So I think the gist today is to reduce more or reuse more so than recycle. A lot of our localities are choosing not to do the recycling programs because the price, and it's just not able to be sourced and treated appropriately. So I would encourage people to buy materials that are recycled. We encourage people to recycle. But first and foremost, there's kind of no magic away place to send all those recyclables. So just really reducing consumption. Trying to use glass or something that can be reused more so than particularly plastic. I don't know if that helps, but it's another challenge out there, and we're just going to have to change. It's no fun, but
yeah, and that's the thing. I think we have bad habits. Let's just be honest, right? We're used to driving cars alone. We're used to buying a lot of plastic. We are a consumer nation, so we probably have much more than we need. And in some way, shape, or form, all of this is contributing to what we see happening on our earth. And again, as I go back at the beginning of this conversation, we as believers are called, or all of mankind really, but especially believers are called to be stewards or managers of our earth. Well, right now our earth is sick, and we have an opportunity to help it heal, or we can make the sickness grow worse. And it's really up to us to make some changes or be advocates for change so that the earth can be better. And so this has been a fantastic conversation tonight. I really want to thank all of you for being on. It's my prayer and hope that tonight will lend itself to future conversations at our church where we go from conversation to action and we start putting things in place that can really impact our environment and our community. So what I'd like to do now at this point is to give all of you a final opportunity to share anything that you would like for us to know or be reminded of. And again, thank you much. So Taylor, I will start with you.
Well, I just want to thank you for having me tonight. First and foremost, thank you so much. This is great. And thank you to Grace and Christy. I learned some stuff from you today, so it's great. But to answer Courtney's question real quick, going back to Grace, what Grace said, she said coastal gyms, and that's what the host put in there, but as well as the Climate Prediction Center. They can give you forecasts 6 to 10 days out, a month out, and 3 months out for not only rainfall, but for temperatures as well. And it's not going to give you the exact number. It's going to give you, will it be above average or below average? Will it be that kind of situation? My last thoughts are, we have, like Pastor Swan just said, we have to just stop talking. We have to actually put things into motion if we want to see these things really come into fruition to help us mitigate climate change. I think that we have the capability and the tools to do so. It's just going to be those small daily things that we have to give up. Maybe not using that plastic straw, maybe using the refillable cup, maybe taking a carpool to church or to work or to the grocery store, just walking. I think that we have the tools at our hands. We just need to use them. Like you said, our earth is very sick. And from this point on, if we do not change, it's not going to get any better. And we want, again, for an earth to be usable for those who live beyond us. So I appreciate your time for us. And again, if you want to stop having all these really, really hot summers all the time, it's time for us to maybe think about, we don't like to have, personally, I don't like to have to feel like 105 degrees 3 days in a row. That would be great if we didn't have to, especially in those urban heat islands. It would be great if we didn't have to. And so I think that if we want to, not go any further, it's time for us to make a change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. And listen, we certainly will be watching you on 13 News as well. And so please make sure you check her out on Channel 13 News during the weather. Thank you, Taylor. We appreciate that. Grace, any final comments?
Just thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's inspiring to be a part of this conversation with professionals like Taylor and Christy, and to be a part of this conversation in your faith community. It really means a lot just to be asked here. And I just want to extend the invitation. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. I know I talked about a lot of resources pretty quickly this evening, so please don't hesitate to reach out. My phone number is 804-914-3510. And I'll also make sure to give all my contact information to Pastor Swan afterwards as well. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah, we'll have it at the church. And so we'll share that information for people who want it. And so thank you again for that. What I want to start doing before I get to you, Miss Everett, is everybody that's watching right now, I need you to go to the chat and I need you to put in caps. I need you to put in caps. Thank you with like 5-6 exclamation points behind it. And then put a whole lot of clapping emojis behind that as well, because this has been a very enlightening conversation that we've had tonight. And I want our guests to know and to see your comments of how appreciative that they are of their time tonight. So please do that right now. Go ahead in the chat, put big thank yous with exclamation points, and let them know how much you appreciate them. Miss Everett, floor is yours, ma'am. Any final comments that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just let's keep the conversation going. And my email is ceverett@cbf.org. And email me if you have a thought. If you say, okay, so where can I get a free tree? I'm ready. I'm serious. And then we'll follow up and find the right information. We love volunteers. Actually, in September in downtown Hampton, we are going to have a free class on, well, I think it's $20, but we can waive that if we need to. But it's a class about the Bay. You come once a Tuesday or Wednesday a week for about 6 weeks and just learn about the Bay. If you want, you can volunteer in your community for that, the following year, but you don't have to. So that's a great program. Again, we would love for you to participate and learn more. But I really just want to make sure people know about, there's so many volunteer opportunities and opportunities to learn more. But email your city council members and say, we need to plant more trees and do more environmental programs. And I think you'll find there's a lot more out there. And like Taylor said, do something individual too, that makes you feel like if you start doing things, people around you start doing things, and it just feels like we can make progress together. But just talking about it, we got to stop that and move on, because like you said, we've got some bad habits we've got to start changing. So thank you all for letting me participate.
Yeah, listen, I want to let the three of you know, anytime you want to come to our church and share any information, that door is always open to you. So you don't even have to ask. Just say, I'm coming. We'll make space for you, and you can share what you're doing, the important work that you're doing in the community, because this is a very important conversation. And again, I want to end as I started with, we are managers of the earth that God has created. And we have to be better at how we're managing the creation. And if it's up to us, it's on us, to do that. If not, then our earth will continue to be sick, and we'll still release all of these gases, and we'll have global warming and greenhouse effect, and we'll still see sea level rise and all the wildfires and all the stuff that's happening. So this really is on us. And I'm hoping that as a church family, we will take seriously this conversation tonight, and we'll start to adopt some things that we can do at our church to address this issue. So thank you all so much for being on tonight, the viewers, for watching. Thank you, guests, for being with us tonight. We hope that you have enjoyed it. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.